Okay. Well, welcome everyone to Drupal with Simple SAML PHP. And today I want to tell you a little bit about SSO, why you want to use it, and cover who this is for and how to get it installed and working. First, a little bit about me. I've been doing LAMP development for quite some time. I discovered Drupal at one of my former employers. It was still we were still using Drupal 5, I think, at the time, and slowly but surely got into it. And I've been doing Drupal pretty much every day in some way or form ever since. And I also play around with VoIP. Love doing stuff with voice XML and PBXs and asterisks, and I'm an entrepreneur. So let me just pretty much show you a quick and dirty installation of this module, these modules that we're going to cover today. So here I have a basic site, and there's this federated login link. It just comes with one of the modules. And is that a question? Oh, okay. When you click this federated login link, you'll see some of the profiles in which I've already configured. This page is the default page that comes with the Simple SAML PHP module. It can be themed, and later I'll show you an example where I've themed this for a client. But this is default. There's multiple languages. I'm just going to use this Facebook one right now. So, not logged in. Redirected me, obviously. If I can remember my password, I'll get in. I don't think that's it. No, that wasn't it. How many people forget their Facebook password? Okay, I'm not alone. Thank you. How dare I do that? And you can see I'm logged in. I just logged onto this website using my Facebook ID to authenticate me. So we're going to go over how that's done and some of the options you can do with that. But what is single sign-on? Single sign-on is a user authentication process that allows users to enter one username and password to access multiple websites, networks, or applications. So then what is Simple SAML PHP? Well, it's a PHP application that handles SAML authentication and SSO. And that's what it stands for. So who should use this? Well, we're at Georgia Tech on this fine day. Well, universities should certainly use this. There's a number of people who are logged or need to create identities within the system. There's many systems to integrate with. So system admins, website developers, companies that require users to log onto their website, marketers that want to capture social or information from your social media accounts about you. And so why should you use a single sign-on? Well, there's less username and passwords for users to remember. And this is the part that I like the most, is less bots to delete. If you trust the identity providers that you're connecting with, and you're only requiring people to log in your site with this mechanism, your SSO mechanism, you can save yourself a lot of headaches. There's less data to manage, theoretically, and there's less security headaches. So, I might have said it already, but IDPs, this is a terminology within the SAML community and SSO. They're identity providers. So these are the people who maintain the user account information that you want to allow access to your site from. So, an example, it's Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. Here's a big one, In Common Federation. Again, Georgia Tech. It's part of the In Common Federation. And also any other Drupal site, if configured properly. So what will you need in order to get Simple SAML PHP working on your Drupal site? Well, you're going to need access to the server in some capacity, because you're going to need to have the Simple SAML PHP package installed. And all the instructions tell you to install it in the var directory. So if you don't have sufficient access to the server, that will be complicated.
Is that installing it outside of your basic HTTP docs directory?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Outside, you would be installing it outside of your web root directory. Though I did try to install it in that web directory and was met with mixed results. I found that doing it the way the instructions specify in the var Simple SAML directory is the best way. You need PHP version 5.30 or greater on your server. There are older versions of Simple SAML that will work on a previous version of PHP, but it comes with some other bugs. So I found this out because I had to work on a site that was running Drupal 6 and things hadn't been updated in a while. And to set up your appropriate API keys and authentication with your IDP sources like Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, there are developer accounts that you will need to set up. And you can, because you'll need to download and enable the Simple SAML PHP site and set up authentication module on your Drupal site. So,
for all of them?
only the ones you want. Only the ones. You may not need to have more than one, and I think I'll just show you that again.
Well, in other words, would you do it for all of them because you think that your users are going to be choosing different ones? In other words, here you only have a selection of Facebook, Google, and LinkedIn, but you might want to use Twitter, or they might want to use Twitter, and you don't have that choice. Is that what you're saying?
Right. It depends on how complex you want to make your authentication process. You may find that you only really want Facebook. You may find that you only want Google Plus or LinkedIn. However, the more you add, the more configuration you'll need to do, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But if you only want the one, Facebook, for example, then you only need the developer account for that IDP. So go to your Drupal site that's already installed. Very first thing you'll want to do is install the Simple SAML PHP authentication module. Hopefully you're using Drush. It's really simple. And you can't read it here, but this is essentially me installing and enable the module with Drush. Next is where you're going to install the Simple SAML PHP package onto your server. And there's a URL, you download it. I've conveniently put the commands that I used here. So at the end, I'll have a link to my website where you can actually get this presentation complete with all these links. But essentially, download and install the package, unzip it, and start editing the config file. There are a few values that you need to change in the config file to get it working. Admin password, secret salt, administrator information, time zone, etc. Oh, let me point out one big thing. For the Simple SAML PHP auth module, your Drupal module, to work properly, you have to change the storage type from memcache to something other than memcache. I'm going to give you an example here. So SQLite is the simplest way to do this. Prior to this particular project I was working on, I hadn't really used SQLite, but it was really easy to get it working. Essentially, define a path to SQLite.sq3 file, and define that location within the configuration file of simple SAML PHP. That was pretty much it. However, if you're working on with a load balanced server, this SQLite option will not work properly. You may want to consider a MySQL database that all of your load balanced servers can access, and that will work across multiple instances. Next, you want to configure Apache. Why, you ask? It's because it's through Apache that you will be able to redefine where simple SAML is loaded from the URL. So in this example here, I have that simple SAML that directory within this demo site, and I have a Apache config file entry that maps an alias. That has an alias setting for that links to the appropriate path where I did an installation. And actually, I just realized this is actually var it's actually var simple SAML PHP ww in my instance. I did mention that I tried putting it in the web group, and it didn't work as well. But you need to make that entry. And once you've done that, you can actually go to your site name /simple SAML, and you will see the installation page for your SAML, simple SAML PHP installation. So like I mentioned before, in that configuration file, you'll set a default password. Well, it's on this page. You look to the right over here. You can, when you first go to the page, you'll be able to log in as the administrator, and you'll enter in that password that you defined in the configuration file. And here you'll be able to see available modules. You'll be able to test your simple SAML package installation. You'll be able to get some debug information. Pretty much anything that's going on in your SAML world, you can find out through here or after you log in with that password. But in this case, I just want to get right to it and look at these available modules. And so once you look at the available modules page, you'll see there's a bunch of them, and you can't really see it there. But since there's a few of us here, I think I can show you probably a little bit better here. You'll see there's off MySpace, off LinkedIn, off Twitter. Let's see, what's another one? There was like Radius here, Drupal off, LDAP, OAuth, yeah, there you go, Portal, Radius. So all these different SAML authentication modules or supporting modules here that we'll need, just like Drupal has modules to make it better, same thing with simple SAML PHP. So we start out, nothing's really enabled. So we'll go to our installation, var simple SAML PHP /modules, and we can start enabling stuff by running a few commands. Touch the module name /enable. That's all you'll need to run. And when we go back to that page and refresh it, we'll see that these modules are now enabled and ready for us to use and configure. So this is where that API key comes in. Because now that you've enabled, say, the Twitter module or Facebook module or what have you, now you have to actually go into the file and add some keys. And each module file has a docs directory, and it essentially tells you this, but for convenience, here are the links for a couple of these. I can't obviously list all of them, but you go to LinkedIn, you apply for your key. I didn't want to show you mine, so I errored it out or blocked it out. But Facebook, very similar. One key thing to note, when you are using Facebook, you have to define what type of application this is, and it's going to be a website. So you'll just make sure it's not an Android app or iOS app, it's a website. So this one's hard to see, but this is essentially where we're going in and configuring the Facebook module in the file called authsources.php. It's in your config folder. And the convenient thing is Simple SAML PHP has all of this code already in it. So you don't even have to go in and do this and figure out what, just uncomment it and put in your API key and your secret, or your key and secret and authenticate. Matter of fact, it's just a key and secret for all of these essentially. So just uncomment it, get the information from your IDP and plug it in. Now, in the beginning of the presentation, I showed you there were multiple login sources or IDP sources. In order to enable that capability within your Simple SAML PHP installation, you do need to also enable the multi-auth module, which was one of the modules listed above. And in there, I can define the different sources I want to allow users to authenticate with. And you can see there I have Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. I can add more, I can add less, but that's essentially what I needed to do in order to make that happen. So now, did all this great stuff within the var directory where we have our Simple SAML PHP. Now we have to go back to our Drupal site and make a few changes. First, we want to activate Simple SAML PHP. We want to tell it where its path is. You may get a warning because Apache doesn't want to load content or files that is not within its web root. There are a few changes you can make. You can add this path to the path variable so that this way your web server will grant access, and that's what I did in this particular case. But essentially set that value, and I can define the authentication source that is that I want to use with this service provider, and that goes back to where I define social gateway here as an authentication source. I defined it here as well in Drupal, so that when people go to log in with the federated login link, I'm giving them those options that was defined in that configuration file. A little bit lower on that file, there's also some user information. In this case specifically, I can pick the attributes in which I want to map to Drupal fields. Obviously, LinkedIn won't have a field called Facebook_CN and Facebook_users. So clearly, I'm only really mapping for that Facebook login. But there is a mechanism to map fields in a more generic way, and that's where we get into more advanced topics. But if you're just using one identity source, then you can find the fields that identity source will give you. And so I'll give you a quick example here, when I'm logged into my SAML tool here, I could choose to test a particular source, and when I click with Facebook, since I was already logged in, it authenticated me and it gives me all this information about that connection, including the fields that Facebook returned to me with the values. So I could use this information to map to Drupal fields what content I want to put in there. So I'm using the Facebook user, Facebook _CN for the username, and CN is my full name.
Preston,
Yes.
do you somehow get more information from someone because they've logged in with Facebook and filled in their profile more fully than if they were on your Drupal site and you asked them to fill out a form? All they want to start with is their username and password, and they don't want to give you any more information. Are you automatically getting a whole lot more information because you've got it from Facebook?
Not entirely. I mean, each identity provider is going to offer different information on that login session, right? So you have to know your IDP to some extent. But to get more information out of the user, there's always rules and workflow to collect more from the user. But this process makes it easier for the user to say, yes, I want to be a part of your site. I don't need to think about what username and password I need to enter. I just log in and authenticate. And if you came to that source and you were already logged in on Facebook and you just clicked it, you would just get in.
Well, once they've logged in, have you then collected that information?
Yeah, this information is the information that I just populated was collected, and it shows up as a user profile on our site, and I'll show that to you.
You got your first and your last name?
The email really isn't their real email; it's a Facebook email.
Yeah.
But we can use that as a placeholder and ask for the email in another way.
I guess all you really got was that they're male or female, first and last name.
In this particular instant, yes. But
Yeah.
depending on how you connect with your identity provider, you can get more information. And so with Facebook, we're not really using, I don't want to say this incorrectly, but we're not using a full SAML interaction where there's a certificate and an exchange and a handshake, like we would find, like, say, in Common Federation, right? So in Common, you can get different pieces of information from the universities, whether they're staff, whether they're faculty, whether they're, employee, what is the value of EDU person entitlement, the full email address. So it depends on who you're talking to, how much information you get. But that's where you can also define a workflow.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I as a user, I guess I would have a perception that I was sort of logging in anonymously, that I wasn't doing any of that because, oh yeah, I'm doing it with my.
Yeah, you could think that you're being anonymous, but you also could think that I don't have to go through the hassle of completing a user profile. I just log on with this, and boom, you accept me. So set those but essentially that's where we're mapping the fields from that particular IDP to things that Drupal can find useful. So I've already demonstrated this, but you can essentially, at this point, you can log in using a federated login. You can choose an authentication source. In this case, I'm only using Facebook. And of course, it'll redirect you, and you're logged in. And that's pretty much how you do this. Some more advanced subjects here is when you're talking between multiple IDPs, there's a process in which you'll have to actually share your metadata with that identity provider. That would be information that you would get from Simple SAML under the Federation link. There's a thing here that says show metadata. So you'll go to your IDPs, your friendly local IDP. Hey, I want to get your identity information. They'll say, well, send me your metadata. You're like, well, meta what? Yeah, go here, click this box, copy that stuff, and fill out this form on my website. And in a day or two, I'll send back an acknowledgement that I've accepted your metadata. Theming. So that area is just pretty plain and usually won't look like your website. And you may want to direct people to a login page that's friendlier looking. Yes, you can do that. You can have multiple themes. This is an example of a themed page I did for my client. They had a blue sky background for their login page anyway. We adopted some of those things and changed the CSS. And one of the things that I did, and I'll figure out a way to share this with you folks, but if you look, I've got Georgia Tech selected in that list there. It's all in alphabetical order. By default, it doesn't come in alphabetical order. I had to rewrite some of the code to make it where it was logical, because you can have multiple IDPs and coming from multiple sources, and this thing just didn't sort it at all. So you can customize it. Property mappings to Drupal fields. So we just covered some basic fields tonight: the username, the email address, but there's a lot of data to be collected from all these sources. I mean, the amount of data that's out there is ridiculous. So there's a lot of information on how to map this data, and that was one of the struggles that I had found. But there was, through the use of some supported modules, some custom modules, and some variables that are set at the time of the handshake and authentication process, I was able to find some different ways to map fields to Drupal fields. Then, like I mentioned earlier, rules. So you can apply all kinds of rules. So in one instance where I'm using this, I have a university set permissions within their network for users. There's a specific field that I give them instructions where I say, hey, if you want your users to have this level of access on my site, give them this permission. If you want them to have this other set of access, give them this other permission. And so I essentially empower the university admins to choose how they want to allow access to this particular site. And so when they do that, I use the Simple SAML PHP role selection. Let's see if I have a picture of it here. No, I cut it off just before I did it. But there's an area where you can select, you can define how roles are applied when people log into this system. And through little help from custom module, I can empower the IDP admins to essentially select what roles will be applied to the users when they log on to my site.
Is that based on the IDP or some data from the IDP?
The question is it based off of the IDP or some data of the IDP? It is based off of the data that is being sent for that user that is defined by the IDP admin. So programmatically, I set a rule, and I set there's an instruction manual essentially to the admins that explain the process. So when they log onto the site specifically for the first time, they don't know. And so the very first thing is I recognize that they're not logged in or with their right attributes. I display a page with instructions. Hey, your admin needs to do this. Their admin, him or her, will go and do it. and essentially give it's a unique enough service that the admins want their faculty to have the right permissions. So it's not like have to do this for all the students. It's really for some faculty, this particular instance. So once they define that one attribute based off of the documentation, oh, I thought it went out. That's what essentially gives the role to that user when they log on. I'm going to see if I have an example of the code here. No, I don't think I have an example of it. But you can use some logic. You can use rules. So once you've defined how roles are going to be signed, you can use rules to say when user from this logs in for the very first time, or counters. I mean, your options are almost limitless at that point. And like I just mentioned, SSO role assignment. There's many different ways to do that. My particular need was to do it in a way that the IDP administrator, I put the work on them to assign roles. So I just built the logic in and let them choose based off of the access they wanted to give their staff members or faculty. And list of some sources, resources. Of course, there's the Drupal project, Simple SAML, PHP auth. There's a lot of great information there. I couldn't have done this without documentation there. The incommon.org website, if you're dealing with any universities, I dealt with a few really smart and helpful individuals there who helped me with a project I was working on with them. Nate was a godsend over there. He really helped me out. On my website, comprise.com/blog/SSO, you'll find this presentation with all the links there. And simplesamlphp.org/docs/stable, because I spent a lot of time on that site because at first the SAML documentation really didn't help me in my unique situation. I had to do this on a Drupal 6 site with the latest old versions of PHP, and it was load balanced, and it was difficult. And that site helped me work through a number of those issues. And one last thing I do want to mention, because I want to save somebody a ton of work if they have the same problem. If you're working in a load balanced environment, or first of all mention that you should use MySQL as instead of Memcache, right, or even instead of SQLite. You'll want to pick one server as your dominant server, and that server you'll need to create a certificate on, and that is a certificate that you will share with your various IDPs. You need to be consistent with that, because you'll copy essentially the cert key from that main server to all the other load balance servers. So it'll share that same cert. Otherwise, you'll have a scenario where you can log in with one, and then you'll go back to the page, to the next page, and you lost that authentication because a different server loaded it with the wrong cert. So you pick one server and share that cert in the SAML certificate folder of all the other sub installations of your website. And that's my presentation. Any questions? Thank you.
How widespread is this used within Drupal?
So I looked at that. I looked at this earlier, and I meant to look that up or remember it, because it was a number of users. Number of downloads, and So,
That's not a big number.
9,100 downloads, 2,543 sites saying that they use it. Compared to, everybody should be using this.
Simple SAML is only one version of this?
Simple SAML.
Or are there multiple ways to use your Facebook? You know, like if you were a Microsoft person or something, or not using Drupal, are there a lot of different products there
That are using SAML?
that can do single sign-on?
Oh, there are other products that do single sign-on, right? There are other Drupal modules that do single sign-on, right? But what I found is the power of this particular tool is that SAML is a standard to some extent, and wherever you can install SAML as an identity provider, you can use Drupal as a service provider to connect to it. So one of my clients had a custom Linux application, and they've got data, and they wanted to sync all their users, and they got this big firm to come out and create a solution to create a single sign-on solution. I don't know, a year and I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars later, they made something, right? And I thought, after discovering this, boy, these guys could have just installed SAML on their, because it was a Linux-based solution, they could have installed SAML, simple SAML PHP, set it up as an identity provider, and all the other Drupal sites that need to connect to this thing could have just talked to that identity provider using this function. And that's, I mean, trust me, I spent weeks working on this, but learning this, but you can install this and get it working in a day, and I hope that people will watch this and go, wow, this really helps me, because I couldn't find videos in English, at least, showing how to do this with Drupal. So you can connect to other things, and you're not dependent upon someone creating a module specifically for that other thing. You can, with a little bit of configuration, if someone's already using SAML, all you need is simple SAML PHP and permission. Hey, I want to connect to you. Okay, give me your metadata. And a lot of places, if they're offering SAML, they want you to connect to them in some regard, either to make it better for their users, or value add for their users, or it's a service they're providing. So if they're promoting SAML, there's some mechanism, whether it's paid or whether it's through some agreement, you can share your metadata. Yes?
Can we go back to the list of providers? There was like a long list, I believe.
Of modules, or? Yeah, that was a list of modules.
Okay, so the modules might be providers in there, like Google and Facebook, but.
Yeah, so I'll show it to you from the live view.
So, I'm thinking about this just from a user perspective. Somebody who is deciding that they want to do single sign-on and they want to pick the provider that offers the best security. Do you know if there are any known security companies
On this list?
type companies that are on the list that would be good?
So what you're looking at here is really more of a list of modules that come with this package. There are more modules that don't come in this package that you can pick, and they're not necessarily all identity providers. So for example, there was one here called Meta Refresh. Yeah. Meta Refresh is a module that if you were using the InCommon network, for example, you would enable this so that it would go out and talk to InCommon on a frequent basis to pull down all the metadata from all the universities within its federation automatically. So you'd want to configure that. But it has nothing to do with any of the identity. It's not an identity provider in itself. It's just a supporting module to help you manage your identity providers. But there are some. But in the case of Facebook, for example, you're not essentially connecting like you would in a normal SAML site, identity provider, service provider relationship. However, there is a module to allow you to authenticate with it. And so if the question is, who are some of the security or secure sites, I'm not sure if there's a list of that. However, there may be a list of people who are identity providers that you can Google. I haven't looked in that regard. I've primarily been working with universities and just the common ones, right? SSO, okay, you need it from your website. Facebook, people can log in with that. Or I'm dealing with businesses. I want them to log in with LinkedIn, or something else that you want to make it easier for your users.
So in other words, your presentation is about how to convert your website to use single sign-on, and what I was thinking about was just my own individual problems with having too many passwords.
Okay.
That I need to pick one of the services such as Google or whatever, and I'm thinking, well, which one is more secure to use as my single sign-on
Sign-on solution.